Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to MetrObelisk Radio. Today we are talking about Bully 2 and the fact that it's probably never ever going to come out. And GameInformer did this huge I don't want to call it expose, but it pretty much is an expose that is titled "The Version of Bully 2 You'll Never Get to Play." Now, this came out like just a couple of days before the end of 2021, December 30th, 2021 to be exact, but I wasn't made aware of it until just recently. So, let's dig right into this, because I do know that Bully was a relatively popular game, and I did play a little bit of it. I had it for the Wii. I think it was a Bully Scholarship Edition, if I'm not mistaken. But let's get right into this. For a while in the late 2000s, developers at Rockstar New England thought they were working on the next big Rockstar game. They were excited to push the company's tech and to bring a cult hit into Rockstar's vision for the future. They were excited for the chance to prove themselves as a Rockstar studio, having recently been purchased by the company. They were excited to lead development on Bully 2, the sequel to Rockstar's critically acclaimed open-world adventure about life in a private school. But things don't always go as planned, and other obligations on a release schedule get in the way of passion projects. Rockstar New England's Bully 2 was shelved in favor of other, more troubled projects in development like Max Payne 3 and Red Dead Redemption. Quote, Rockstar New England wanted to be sort of the golden child in the Rockstar thing, but it's really hard when Rockstar North was the one that was producing all the golden eggs at the time, one developer says. Living in the shadows of someone who casts a big shadow like Rockstar North and trying to usurp that role, it's really difficult and nearly impossible, but man did they try, oh did they try. To find out what exactly the studio was planning with Bully 2 and why it was ultimately let go in favor of other projects, we, referring to GameInformer, recently spoke to 5 former employees from Rockstar's New England studio and 1 from its New York City headquarters, most of whom requested anonymity out of fear of repercussions from Rockstar, which Rockstar and Take-Two Interactive in this day and age, it would not surprise me what type of repercussions that they would be facing, because Rockstar is not the same company that it was just 10 years ago. Their story is one of shifting company cultures, tech that would finally find its way into Rockstar games as late as 2018's Red Dead Redemption 2, and disappointment over the way things went. I thought Red Dead Redemption 2 came out in 2017. I could be wrong. Let me look that up real quick before we move on. Nope, I was wrong. Red Dead Redemption 2 did come out in 2018. I swore it came out in 2017. I do apologize for that, guys. So let's go ahead and let's dig right into this article. In the late 90s to mid-2000s, Rockstar Games was on a spending spree. After the initial success of its massive series Grand Theft Auto, Rockstar bought a lot of its third-party partner studios. One of those studios was DMA Design, renamed Rockstar North, developer of the first Grand Theft Auto. Another was Angel Studios, the developer of Red Dead Revolver, Red Dead Redemption, and the Smuggler's Run and Midnight Club series, which the publisher acquired and renamed Rockstar San Diego. Mad Dog Software, founded in Andover, Massachusetts in 1999 by former Activision technical director Ian Lane Davis, was another Rockstar acquisition. Davis holds a doctorate in artificial intelligence and robotics from Carnegie Mellon University. According to former developers GameInformer spoke to, as well as an archived version of Mad Dog's website, AI was a core pillar of the studio's pedigree. The website claimed that the studio's team, composed of developers who previously worked on franchises like Civilization, System Shock, and Thief, had a quote-unquote unmatched expertise in the field. For its first decade, Mad Dog operated on a work-for-hire basis, taking projects from publishers such as Activision, Sierra Entertainment, Disney Interactive, and Vivendi Games. Prior to its purchase by Rockstar, Mad Dog mostly developed PC strategy games such as the Star Trek Armada and Empire Earth series. Empire Earth became Mad Dog's bread and butter once the studio took over development on the first game's expansion pack, The Art of Conquest. Though that initial release was met with middling reviews, Mad Dog's next 2 Empire Earth games, Empire 2 and its expansion, The Art of Supremacy, were successful enough to lead to deals with publishers like Bethesda Softworks and Rockstar. In October 2006, Rockstar released Bully as a PlayStation 2 exclusive. The game, developed by Rockstar's Vancouver studio in Canada, was a subversion of the formula that had made the publisher's games famous, where in other Rockstar titles like the Grand Theft Auto series, players controlled a criminal free to cause mayhem around an open-world city or state. Bully put players in control of Jimmy Hopkins, a high school student at the Bulworth Academy boarding school. Rather than kill people, Jimmy got in fistfights. Instead of guns, he had stink bombs and slingshots. Rather than pull off robberies or heists, Jimmy pulled pranks and went to class. Coincidentally, the game was set in New England, Mad Doc's backyard. I have to quit saying Mad Dog, it's Mad Doc, like Doc as in doctor. Bully was critically and commercially successful, receiving the highest possible review scores from outlets like XPlay and 1UP, and a Game of the Year nomination from GameSpot. In March 2008, Take-Two Interactive, Rockstar's parent company, announced that the game had sold more than 1.5 million copies. For comparison, Grand Theft Auto 4, released in April 2008, sold more than 8.5 million copies within its first month. Back over at Mad Dog, Empire Earth 3, released in November 2007, was critically panned. The company was in a tough spot, a former Mad Dog employee said. Quote, Mad Dog, up until being acquired by Rockstar, was pretty typical of most independent game studios in that it mostly survived by working on IP from publishers while trying to develop and pitch its own games, he says. Those tough times would be alleviated by a new partner, Rockstar. After the success of Bully on PlayStation 2, Rockstar approached Mad Dog about developing Bully Scholarship Edition, a remaster with new missions, characters, and items. Mad Dog led the development of Scholarship Edition's Xbox 360 and Windows PC versions, released in March and October 2008 respectively, while Rockstar Toronto developed the Wii port. See, I knew that the game released for the Wii. That's where I played Bully, was on the Wii. In April 2008, Rockstar announced it had acquired Mad Dog Software for an undisclosed amount and renamed the studio Rockstar New England. Speaking in a news release announcing the acquisition, Rockstar co-founder and president Sam Houser said that making Mad Dog a Rockstar studio would, quote, enhance our core technology and further support our commitment to creating progressive and innovative gaming experiences. We're eager to bring our expertise to bear in the character-driven open-world stories that make Rockstar games so uniquely compelling, Davis, who became studio head of Rockstar New England after the purchase, said in the release. According to the developers GameInformer spoke to, opinions on becoming a Rockstar studio were positive at the time. Some staffers, such as 3D artist Tim Samuels, were excited by the prospect of making games for one of the biggest developers in the world. Quote, I thought it was actually really, really cool, Samuel says. It's like, hey, Rockstar, I mean, these guys are AAA. They're number one on the top. We just took it in stride and started working. Rockstar itself, you say, I work at Rockstar. People were really in awe of that, one former developer says. It was nice to have some clout to a job, you know. I was excited to work on anything that they had because most of the games that they churn out had been pretty golden. However, some say they gradually started to see Mad Dog's workplace culture disappear after the acquisition, and that crunch became a more prevalent issue within the studio once it was under the Rockstar banner. Quote, don't get me wrong, during the making of Empire Earth 3, there was much crunch at Mad Dog, but it was handled well, says a former developer. There were days to make up for it. No one was cracking a whip over our heads. Every now and then we would have fire drills on Fridays. You could pull the fire drills in air quotes because it was really just the producer at the time. It was his way of letting us out early. There was a much better balance between work and life. Shortly after Rockstar purchased Mad Dog, the Rockstar's former vice president of development, Geronimo Barrera, visited the studio, the developer continues. Barrera was there to field employee questions but left some feeling uneasy about their new employer. Quote, one of the first red flags was when someone asked about hours and weekends and stuff like that, the developer recalled. Geronimo's answer was something to the effect of, well, we don't work every weekend. He's like, for example, I'm not working this Saturday. The emphasis was on every and then this. were a little disquieting in their effort. In 2019, a report from Kotaku detailed Barrero's reputation within Rockstar, citing multiple employees describing him as abrasive and volatile. One employee also accused Barrero of sexual assault while working at Rockstar. Barrero categorically denied all of the allegations of misconduct. Well, no shit, everyone's gonna do that in whoopsie daisy. Here we go. Shortly after the purchase, developers at Rockstar New England began work on numerous projects. There was still work to finish on the PC version of Scholarship Edition, but the studio also assisted in the development of other Rockstar games, such as Grand Theft Auto 4's 2 story expansions and Red Dead Redemption. In addition to support work, Rockstar New England was given the chance to develop its own game, a sequel to Bully. According to some developers, it was a chance to prove themselves. The late 2000s marked a shift in direction for Rockstar. For much of the company's early history, it released games at a rate that co-founder Jamie King called relentless, sometimes developing or publishing as many as 9 or 10 new releases a year, not including ports. While the Grand Theft Auto series has been a massive moneymaker for the company since the success of 2001's Grand Theft Auto 3, the bulk of the publisher's library from its first decade was padded out with forgotten games such as Surfing H3O, Austin Powers, Oh Behave, and State of Emergency. After Grand Theft Auto 4 launched in 2008, that schedule slowed down. While Rockstar still released plenty of ports of its older games on new platforms, which it continues to do today, its number of annual games dropped to 1 or 2. After the launch of Grand Theft Auto 5 in 2013, which went on to become one of the most successful entertainment properties of all time, Rockstar stopped putting out new games on a yearly basis. Its next tentpole release wouldn't come until 5 years later with the release of Red Dead Redemption 2 in 2018. The change in the company's release schedule also marked a shift in direction for its games. Early on, Rockstar put out a hodgepodge of titles of different genres and qualities, but after 2008, the publisher began to lean further into more expensive, more prestigious releases, often focused on an older audience and built around gunplay. The company touted the tech behind its games more, such as LA Noire's facial capture technology. Its development budgets sometimes reportedly pushed more than $250 million. A new Rockstar game became an event, something that didn't happen often. Rockstar New England's plan for Bully 2 was in line with this vision, according to the developers on the project. It was a chance to let the Bully series sit alongside Rockstar games of the time, such as Grand Theft Auto 4 and Red Dead Redemption. It was a chance, as one former developer recalls, to shoot for the moon because even if we don't quite make it, we're already much further than if we had aimed a little bit lower. Quote, there was a lot of focus on character, very deep systems, seeing how far we could push that, and putting it up there alongside a GTA, one developer on the product says. I think they wanted to bring that kind of world to the Bully universe, another says. For developers at Rockstar New England, this meant making the world of Bully 2 bigger and deeper than that of the original game, and putting a considerable amount of resources into its creation. While GameInformer wasn't able to get an exact number of people working on the project, 3 people said almost the entire studio worked on Bully 2, at some point with overall headcount estimations being around 50 to 70 people. Quote, at one point, I think it was everybody, one former developer says. The studio itself, that was going to be their game. 3 different developers told us that the game's open world map wouldn't have been as big as that of, say, Grand Theft Auto 4, but their estimates on its planned scope describe it as ranging from the size of Grand Theft Auto Vice City's open world to 3 times the size of the original Bully school map. What it would have lacked in overall size, it would have made up for with depth. For example, Rockstar New England planned to make every building in the game enterable either by normal means or by forced entry. Quote, if you could see it, you could go into it, one former developer on the project says. Quote, the player was not going to be driving a car anywhere, so the total playable space and land size was definitely going to be smaller, another developer says. Mostly because kids, he's not going to be driving, and also because we wanted these very deep systems. Like, if you can go into every building, that's a lot of work. we'd rather not have a really massive world, maybe scale that back a little bit so that we can make sure that we have all these meaningful things in there. Bolstered by Rockstar New England's pedigree in artificial intelligence, the studio was experimenting with ways to make the player's actions more meaningful than in previous Rockstar games. Take, for example, the honor system in the first Red Dead Redemption. If protagonist John Marston helps a non-player character, his honor rating rises. But if the player directs Marston to commit crimes, then Marston's honor falls. While this affects how NPCs react to Marston out in the world, specific NPCs don't remember his individual actions. In Bully 2, however, Rockstar New England was trying to develop ways for characters to remember Jimmy for there to be good and bad consequences for his actions. Quote, "We really wanted to make sure that people remembered what you did. So if you pulled a prank on your neighbor, they'd remember it," says one developer. That your actions had more meaning beyond a 20-foot radius and the 5-second memories of the non-playable characters near you. Parts of this system can be seen in Red Dead Redemption 2. Two developers tell GameInformer, players see changes in protagonist Arthur Morgan's behavior based on his honor. If Morgan has high honor, he's a more compassionate character. If Morgan has low honor, he's driven by greed and apathy. Similarly, if Morgan robs a store, he can't just walk back into it a few minutes later as if nothing happened. The store clerk remembers Morgan and denies him service, asking him to leave. Quote, "The way that you interact with other characters in the world, more than just with your gun or with your fist, they have some sense of memory. A lot of that stuff originated in Bully 2, one developer said. From what I remember reading in some of the design docs and my conversations with people is you could build relationships with characters in the world," he says about Bully 2. "You'd be like best friends with the chef in the mansion or whatever, or the chef could really hate you or something, and that would open up different options. I don't know to the extent of where that ended up, if that got pared down into a general you're good Jimmy versus you're bad Jimmy, or what. But I know in some of the early ideas being thrown around, you would have that fine-grained level of relationships to other characters in the world. Beyond the game's open world, developers describe a breadth of different interactivity options and new features. One detail recalled by two developers was a progressive grass growing system where grass throughout the world would grow realistically and players could see individual blades. Quote, "You could go and mow the lawn and then it would actually be lower," one former developer says. "You could actually do a good job, go back and forth and create lines on people's lawns, that kind of thing." Whoops, scrolled a little too far. Here we go. It sounds so silly, but it was something that we were all excited about because of the technology behind it, another developer says of the grass growing mechanic. Because Rockstar New England wanted to give players the option to break into houses, the team developed a new glass fragmentation system, new tech made for Bully 2 that hadn't been used in prior Rockstar games, though it find its way into later titles. Quote, if you've played Max Payne 3 and you shot some glass, instead of just the glass breaking the same way every time, we had built this whole system so that this chunk right near the impact of the first bullet would break out, and you would see a little spider web of glass, one developer says. Then if you shot some more of the glass, little individual chunks near where you actually shot would fall out. It made it look realistic. Multiple people on the project describe an in-depth climbing mechanic plan for the game. When exploring the open world, Jimmy would be able to climb trees, fences, and ledges on top of roofs, as well as out of his window when sneaking out. Quote, trees were obviously a big one. We wanted the player to be able to climb up the tree to hide or do some hijinks with all sorts of things like paintball guns or water balloons, all that sort of stuff, a former developer says. While the developers put a lot of work into figuring out how the climbing would be implemented in Bully 2, they never got far enough into development to completely nail it down, according to three former developers on the project. Quote, we worked with a lot of GTA assets just so we could get something prototyped quickly, one developer says about the climbing. We tried to work a lot of that in. It's like, well, when he's hanging for this long, how long does he hang before he lets go? Do we want to do a foot over foot balancing act like you're walking along a branch versus sidestepping side to side if you were working along the branch but to the side? It was stuff like that and trying to figure out what worked or what looked the best as the player. Housing these new features was a vertical slice of Bully 2 that Rockstar New England had up and running. According to 4 developers at the studio and 1 person at Rockstar's New York City headquarters, Bully 2 was playable. Developers could run around the world and interact with objects and non-player characters, and there were some missions, such as involving go-karts, another with a beekeeper, a Camp Krusty style mission, oh god, Camp Krusty, a classic Simpsons episode, and one that Jimmy had, and one that had Jimmy in his underwear, even featuring a crotch bulge. Quote, "It was definitely going to be a little risque," a former developer said. There was a lot of 80s kids on bikes movies like The Goonies that came up as reference. Porky's was another commonly used movie for reference, he says. We looked at a lot of those things. We looked at a lot of those kinds of things. It's definitely in that style. As one developer on the project recalls, the team had mapped out all the terrain for the game's world. Additionally, NPCs were walking around doing various day-to-day tasks. Building and houses within the game were also starting to become feature complete, though he points out they weren't in a shippable form yet. Quote, "The game was at least 6 to 8 hours playable," says Mark Anthony Rodriguez, a former game analyst for Rockstar's New York City headquarters and one of the project leads on Bully Scholarship Edition. "So fully rendered, fully realized." Quote, "That sounds about right for the size of the vertical slice that Rockstar projects were being built around at the time," a second source says when asked about whether during his time working on the project, the game was playable for 6 to 8 hours. Monitor's fucking up. Here we go. Two developers GameInformer spoke to estimate that if development had continued, Bully would still have needed 2 or 3 or more years before being ready to be shipped. But those years wouldn't come. Over time, Rockstar began pulling people off the project and putting them on other in-development games that needed help. For the developers GameInformer spoke to, once anyone got pulled off Bully 2, they never returned. None of the developers GameInformer spoke to knows exactly why Rockstar New England was chosen to develop Bully 2, though it's worth pointing out that Rockstar Vancouver, developer of the first Bully, was leading development on Max Payne 3 at the time. The developers say they felt that the opportunity to work on Bully 2 was a chance to prove that Rockstar New England was worth the money Rockstar had spent to acquire it, which was a sentiment shared by employees at other studios purchased by the company around the same time. Quote, "I mean, that's a pretty common thing that I'll refer to them as New York. The New York office kind of asks of any new Rockstar studio is for them to prove that they're worth the investment," one ex-Bully 2 developer says. Rodriguez echoes this statement, saying the Bully 2 project was New England's quote-unquote heavy lift for Rockstar, though he admits the studio had a history with the company before the acquisition. Quote, "This was not their first rodeo with working with Rockstar," Rodriguez says. "The only way I could state it is they had a proven track record, and that was the only reason they were acquired. The main acquisition was to have a foothold that was closer than Rockstar North and was going to be able to handle the AI aspect of what the interaction within this game was going to be, the communication tools within this game," he adds. "Mad Doc wasn't like something to fucking turn your nose up at." Rockstar declined to participate in the story. All other interview requests GameInformer sent to current or former members of the New York office were either ignored or turned down. Well, surprise, surprise there. And I'll get into my 2 cents on that by the end of this. Just trust me on that one. Regardless of the why behind it, former developers on the project describe a lot of excitement for the chance to develop a sequel to Bully. Quote, "It was really just, let's do everything that they're asking really well because we want to impress these folks," one former developer said. There were some late nights for sure, staying up until midnight, 1, 2 in the morning, says another developer on the project. "We were hustling to prove ourselves because I think just about anybody working on Bully 2 just absolutely loved it. It was certainly a labor of love by just about anybody that was working on it. I think most of the people that worked on it look back on it fondly and kind of wistfully wishing it could have worked out. But Rockstar had other priorities. There were other games in the company's pipeline that needed help and attention. In 2010, Rockstar New England began pulling people off Bully 2, developers said, having them focus solely on projects like Max Payne 3. This point in Rockstar New England's history marks a dedicated shift in tone. While most developers speak fondly and excitedly about their work on Bully 2, when talking about projects such as Max Payne 3 and Red Dead Redemption, their tone turns dour. The developers make two main points regarding this specific time in Rockstar New England's history. One is the crunch. Developers describe months-long crunch periods where they'd have to work late into the night and on weekends, sometimes between 12 and 16-hour days. Others describe joining a project only to immediately start crunching, or crunching on one project just to be rolled onto another project and having to crunch on that one too. One developer speaking to GameInformer used the word endless to describe the crunch at the studio. Quote, "I mean, it was just ridiculous," one former developer says, describing the development of Red Dead Redemption. "I know that it won Game of the Year, and that was great and satisfying, but the approach to development was just, it was ridiculous. It took no one's life outside of work into account." Usually you're like, oh, I've got to get this out. We want to try and hit this, another developer says. So everybody works really hard for like a week, 2 weeks, but then when the milestone ended, they're like, well, let's try and preemptively fix things that we know that they're going to say. So we'll just keep crunching until we get word back, and then we wouldn't get word back for 6 more weeks or something like that. So people were kind of breaking. It was breaking people quickly. The other thing developers bring up is a culture change within Rockstar New England. It wasn't instant, they say, and wasn't much of a problem on Bully 2, but 3 developers GameInformer spoke with say that as time went on, the studio got further from the culture that had attracted them to join Mad Dog Software. As some developers describe it, they felt they were expected by other people within the company to prove their dedication to Rockstar through long hours, and that they would be quote unquote harassed when trying to leave the studio. Quote, "When it came time for you to leave, it was a lot of just trying to get you out without being harassed on the way out the door," one former developer tells GameInformer. The culture just changed, another former developer says. "I saw people that previously I really liked become just psychophantic. And then there was the whole bodies and chairs thing, you know. You don't have work to do, but you're going to be here on the weekend because there's some studio head that's going to be walking around. This doesn't even get into the off-work hours stuff where it was like a hard-working frat house. There is an age and a person that is really drawn to that. Rockstar, in my opinion, is well aware of this." Some of the developers GameInformer spoke to describe how they decided to leave the studio as the workload increased and the culture kept changing. One described it as voting with his feet. Others had that decision made for them. In June 2009, Rockstar New England went through a sizable layoff. Sources within the studio told Kotaku that, quote, "at least 10% of the studio had been let go." This included the entirety of the quality assurance department, as Rockstar shifted all of its QA to a dedicated studio. Members of the studio's art team and other departments were also let go. At the time of the layoffs, outlets reported that Rockstar would help those affected find new jobs. According to 3D artist Tim Samuels, who lost his job in this round of layoffs, that didn't actually happen. He also says he wasn't told why he was being let go. Due to the timing of the cuts before the release of Red Dead Redemption, which was the last project that Samuels and others affected by the layoffs had worked on, none of them received bonuses for their work. Quote, "We didn't even get a copy of the game," Samuel says. That's probably why the layoffs happened, if we're being 100% honest there. Quote, "That layoff was pretty devastating to a lot of people in the studio and stuck with me even after I had left," says one developer who spoke to GameInformer anonymously. It never really made much sense to me as to why it happened, and I don't recall there being an official explanation." Well, the official explanation might have been that, Rockstar just didn't want to pay all the developers the bonuses, so they just decided to, axe some of them. That way they could just allow that money to just, float to the top, like most other companies do now. As of February 2017, Rockstar has shipped more than 15 million copies of Red Dead Redemption. It's considered one of the best games ever made. In April 2020, Kotaku reported that Rockstar was taking steps to address its crunch problems across all of its studios. Over the years, news of Bully 2's development has spread around the game industry. Higher-ups at Rockstar have also talked several times about their interest in the series. In 2009, Sean Lee, composer on the first Bully, told the Gaming Liberty, quote, "It looks like I will be doing the soundtrack for Bully 2 in the not-too-distant future." In 2011, Dan Houser told Gamasutra, In 2011, Dan Houser told Gamasutra that the company might work on Bully 2 after it released Max Payne 3, which ended up launching in May of 2012. In 2013, Houser told Polygon that he wanted to make a Bully sequel, quote, "There's a lot of directions I could go with that one," he said. In February 2020, Rockstar announced that Houser would be leaving the company the following month. There have also been a small number of reports and leaks about the development of Bully 2. In 2017, the Twitter account Bully 2 Info posted numerous pieces of supposed concept art and in-game screenshots. According to GameInformer's contacts, the large majority of those leaks are legitimate. In July 2019, YouTuber SWEGTA, I don't know how to pronounce his name, uploaded a video based on a conversation with a former Rockstar New England employee about Bully 2 and Rockstar Games' decision to shelve the project in 2009. In October 2019, VGC published a report about the game saying the project was in development at Rockstar New England for between 12 and 18 months before fizzling out. The report said that while Dan Houser had a script and story outline as early as 2008, development in New England occurred sometime between Red Dead Redemption's release in 2010 and the end of 2013. That roughly lines up with what GameInformer has heard, though developers were talked to say they remember the game being in development between 2008 and 2010 before the release of Red Dead Redemption. Rockstar Games has never said anything publicly about Bully 2 being in development. We weren't able to confirm whether there was anyone at Rockstar New England or any other Rockstar studio still working on the project. Although one developer says a build of the game still exists at Rockstar New England as recently as a few years ago, parts of which were used as reference material for later projects. We don't know if a version of Bully 2 will ever see the light of day, but a decade after development, people that worked on the project still express fondness for the game and their work, and they say they still hope they'll get a chance to play a full release. Quote, "It was going to be really cool," one former developer said. What we had was pretty amazing, especially given the very short amount of time that we were working on it. It certainly would have been very unique, very interesting, certainly a lot of fun, a lot of cool and interesting mechanics that we're working on that still aren't in other games. Quote, "It's still a concept, in my opinion, worth exploring," another says, "and I think it would be a missed opportunity for them to let it go forever." And I do agree with that last statement. You know, the Rockstar choosing to not release Bully 2, deciding to shelve it, really has not helped their image, because what has Rockstar Games effectively become as of like 2008, as they point out? Well, it's basically become the studio behind Grand Theft Auto and Red Dead Redemption. You know, they just don't want to make any other games anymore. And that's really a shame because, you know, Rockstar used to be like the studio, you know, the studio that, you know, would release Grand Theft Auto, but also release games like Manhunt and Bully. And at one point they even had a ping pong game, but now they've gotten their portfolio has gotten so homogenized that it's like that Rockstar has really, really lost its identity. So would Bully 2 have really helped out? Yeah, it would have. Would Bully 2 have been the greatest game ever made, as some of these developers are saying? To answer that question, I truly don't know, and no one truly knows. You know, it's one thing to say that you had a great game and great tech behind it. It's another thing to see what the execution would have been, and put it quite simply, we're never going to see what that execution is. But guys, I'm going to go ahead and end it right here before I tangent off for way too long. Guys, also do let me know, what do you think about Bully 2? Was this a game that you would have played? Is this a game that you do still hope that Rockstar puts out? But anyway, guys, I'm going to go ahead and end it right here because we have gone on for long enough about Bully 2. If you stuck around this long, thanks so much for doing so. And if you've been following me long enough, you know I'm terrible at ending these videos. So I will just see you guys next time.